The year 1870 clung to the town of Havenwood, Maine, like the persistent damp fog that rolled in from the Atlantic. It was a place where gravestones outnumbered living souls, and the perpetual chill seemed to seep not just into the bones, but into the very spirit of its inhabitants. For 12-year-old Eleanor Vance, this bleak landscape was all she had ever known. Her parents, lost to the unforgiving sea, had left her an orphan, a ghost in a town full of them. Her only solace was a vivid, almost unsettling imagination that made the world feel a little less gray. But her life was about to change in a way she could never have foreseen. Old Mr. Finch, the town's undertaker, a man whose hands were as cold as the coffins he built, had passed away in his sleep. With no kin to speak of, the grim task of his final arrangements fell to the Blackwood family, the new undertakers in town. They were an enigma, having arrived from parts unknown just a few years prior, and had quickly become the subject of hushed whispers and morbid fascination. The Blackwoods were not just undertakers. They were practitioners of a bizarre and unsettling tradition. They hosted grand feasts after every funeral. It was a spectacle both grotesque and enthralling, a celebration of life on the very heels of death. It was this peculiar family who, in a twist of fate, took Eleanor in. A distant relation to the Blackwoods, a connection no one had known about until now. The head of the household, Elias Blackwood, was a man with a face as chiseled as a tombstone and eyes that held the weight of centuries. His wife, Martha, was a portly woman with a deceptively gentle smile and hands that were always kneading something, dough, fabric, or perhaps the very threads of a person's life. Their son, Arthur, was a quiet, lanky boy a few years older than Eleanor, who seemed to carry a perpetual sorrow in his gaze. Eleanor was led into their home, a grand Gothic structure that smelled of old wood, beeswax, and a faint cloying sweetness she couldn't place. It was a stark contrast to the small, salt-sprayed cottage she had shared with her parents. Here, every shadow seemed to hold a secret, and the silence was thick with an unsaid history. She was given a small room at the top of the house, a space that overlooked the family cemetery, a macabre garden of stone and names she was quickly learning to recognize. The first funeral feast she witnessed was for Mr. Finch. The town gathered, less out of respect and more out of a grim curiosity. The air was heavy with the scent of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the underlying aroma of freshly dug earth. Eleanor watched, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach as the Blackwoods served their guests with an almost theatrical cheer. Elias carved a large roast with an unnerving precision, his movements as fluid and practiced as a surgeon's. Martha laughed, a hearty, booming laugh that seemed out of place in the somber setting. Even Arthur managed a weak, strained smile. Eleanor, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. As she nibbled on a piece of bread, she watched Elias refill a guest's plate. She noticed a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the man's hand. It was the hand that had held a shovel just hours before, and now it was serving food to the mourners of the very man he had buried. It was a small detail, but it lodged itself in Eleanor's mind, a splinter of doubt she couldn't dislodge. That night, as the house finally fell silent, Eleanor lay awake in her bed, her mind replaying the day's events. The sound of a muffled sob from a nearby room drew her attention. She crept out of her room and followed the sound to a closed door down the hall. It was Arthur's room. She heard him whispering, but it wasn't a conversation. It was a prayer, a desperate, broken plea. "Please, I didn't want to. I'm so sorry." The words were fragmented, a mosaic of guilt and despair. Eleanor's heart ached for him, but a cold dread began to curl in her gut. What was he so sorry for? The next day, she found a small, leather-bound journal tucked away in a dusty corner of the library. It was filled with elegant, sloping handwriting that belonged to a previous generation of Blackwoods. The journal was not a diary, but a ledger, meticulously detailing the ingredients used for each funeral feast. It was filled with lists of herbs, spices, and exotic ingredients that Eleanor had never heard of, all accompanied by cryptic notes about their properties. One entry dated years ago read, "For old Mr. Gable, a touch of nightshade to sweeten the grief. No one will ever know. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She was a child and her imagination was a lively place. But this wasn't imagination. This was a dark, tangible secret, a whisper of poison in the past. The thought, once planted, took root and began to grow. She started observing the Blackwoods with a new, sharper eye. Their smiles seemed to hide a grim purpose, their traditions a grotesque charade. The funeral feasts were not a celebration of life, but a grim ritual, a perverse communion. Eleanor began to realize that the Blackwoods were not just undertakers, they were something far more sinister. And she, the orphaned girl, with an uncanny ability to see the world for what it truly was, had just been invited to their table. The first funeral feast was over. The next one was already being prepared. If you enjoyed this first chapter and are intrigued by the macabre secrets of the Blackwood family, be sure to subscribe to the channel to not miss the rest of Eleanor's chilling journey. The truth is much darker than you can imagine. The old ledger became Eleanor's secret companion, a grim guide to the Blackwoods' twisted world. She hid it under a loose floorboard in her room, a constant source of both dread and morbid fascination. The entries, written in Elias's spidery hand, weren't just about herbs and spices. They were filled with cryptic observations on the deceased. Mr. Albright, a known miser. His greed soured his blood. A touch of foxglove to sweeten the bitter end. Miss Adeline, a gossiper. Her tongue was a serpent's, a pinch of hemlock to silence the lies. The words chilled Eleanor to the bone. They weren't just preparing meals, they were crafting a macabre narrative, a grotesque post-mortem judgment. Eleanor's days became a careful dance of observation and deceit. She would linger in the kitchen, pretending to help Martha with chores, her eyes darting between the pots and the woman's movements. She noticed Martha's hands, always kneading, now seemed to handle ingredients with an unsettling reverence. Once, she saw Martha delicately crushing a small bell-shaped flower into a paste, her face a mask of serene concentration. When Eleanor asked what it was, Martha simply smiled and said, "A secret ingredient, dear, for a particularly persistent cough." Eleanor knew it wasn't for a cough. The flower was a lily of the valley, beautiful and deadly. The next funeral was for a young boy, a quiet, sickly child named Thomas. The town's grief was palpable, a heavy blanket of sorrow that even the Blackwoods' cheer couldn't fully lift. During the feast, Eleanor watched Elias and Martha closely. They seemed to pay special attention to Thomas's grieving parents, offering them a stew from a special pot, urging them to eat. "It's a recipe passed down for generations," Elias said, his voice a low rumble, said to ease the pain of loss. The parents, their faces pale and drawn, ate without question. Eleanor, however, felt the all-too-familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She saw Elias exchange a subtle, knowing glance with Martha, a fleeting moment of dark understanding that spoke volumes. As the days turned into weeks, Eleanor's suspicion deepened. She noticed a pattern. The people who died in Havenwood were never those who perished from sudden accidents or the unforgiving sea. They were always the sick, the elderly, or those with long-term ailments. And a significant number of them had, at some point, been under the care of the Blackwoods, either for their ailing health or simply as friends seeking comfort. It was a terrifying realization. The Blackwoods weren't just capitalizing on death, they were orchestrating it. Eleanor's only ally, though he didn't know it, was Arthur. The lanky, sorrowful boy seemed to be her unspoken accomplice in this house of horrors. He was quiet, reserved, and often found sketching alone in his room. His drawings were not of landscapes or people, but of anatomical diagrams, human hearts and lungs, rendered with an eerie precision. One evening she found him crying quietly over a sketch of a child's hand. When she asked him about it, he quickly hid the drawing, his eyes filled with a terror that mirrored her own. "They don't want me to talk about it," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They say it's just my imagination." That night, Eleanor overheard a heated argument between Elias and Arthur in the study. Elias's voice was a low, menacing growl. "You will not defy us, Arthur. It is our legacy, our duty. This is the way we keep the family prosperous." Arthur's response was a choked sob. But it's wrong, Father. It's monstrous." The words hung in the air, a confirmation of Eleanor's darkest fears. The next morning, Arthur was silent and withdrawn. He didn't meet her gaze, and a new, deeper sorrow seemed to have settled over him. Eleanor felt a surge of both pity and resolve. She knew she couldn't face this alone. She had to find a way to get through to him, to make him see that they were in this together. She began leaving him little notes, scribbled on torn pieces of paper and tucked into his books or under his pillow. They were simple at first. "You are not alone. I believe you." But as her fear and determination grew, so did the content of the notes. "I know about the feasts. I saw the ledger." She was testing the waters, trying to find a crack in his armor of despair. One day, she found a note of her own, tucked inside a book she was reading. It was Arthur's handwriting. "Be careful, Eleanor. You don't understand the full extent of it. The truth is more terrible than you can imagine. They watch everything." The words were a stark warning, a chilling confirmation of her suspicions. He knew. He had always known. The following week, Mrs. Gable, a kindly old woman who lived on the edge of town, was reported to be gravely ill. The Blackwoods were quick to visit her, bringing with them a basket of comforts, a thick broth and a freshly baked loaf of bread. Eleanor watched them leave, a cold knot of dread in her stomach. 2 days later, Mrs. Gable was dead. The funeral feast for Mrs. Gable was even more elaborate than the others. Elias, with a terrifying gravitas, announced that the centerpiece of the meal was a traditional family dish, a stew made from a secret Blackwood recipe. Eleanor, from her corner of the room, watched the mourners eat with gusto, oblivious to the grim reality. But she noticed Arthur, his face a ghostly white, sitting at the far end of the table, his plate untouched. He caught her eye, a look of profound anguish and fear on his face. Eleanor knew she had to act. She couldn't let another one of these macabre rituals pass. She had to find a way to expose them, to stop them. But how? They were a powerful family, respected and feared in equal measure. Who would believe an orphaned girl's wild accusations against the town's most prominent citizens? As she lay in bed that night, the weight of the secrets crushing her, she heard a sound outside her window. A tapping, soft and persistent. She crept to the window and peered out. It was Arthur standing in the moonlight, a single finger to his lips, a silent plea for secrecy. In his hand, he held a small, withered flower. It was a lily of the valley. He had understood her silent pleas. He had seen her terror. And now he was reaching out, offering a fragile hand in the darkness. The whispers of the dead were no longer just a figment of her imagination. They were a chilling reality, and she was now part of their story. Arthur's silent gesture was a lifeline. In the days that followed, their communication became a clandestine dance of notes and furtive glances. He taught her how to recognize the different plants in the Blackwood's secret garden behind the house, a place filled with beautiful yet deadly flora. He pointed out the foxglove, its bell-shaped flowers a harbinger of heart failure, and the nightshade, with its shiny black berries, a swift and silent poison. Each plant had a name, a use, and a victim. Arthur's knowledge was terrifyingly extensive, a testament to a lifetime spent under his family's dark tutelage. Eleanor began to piece together the terrifying puzzle. The Blackwoods, she realized, were not merely poisoners. They were collectors. They didn't just kill for profit, they killed to harvest. Arthur, with a shudder, explained the family business went far beyond the funeral feasts. They used the bodies of the deceased to create a gruesome sort of taxidermy, preserving organs and bone to be sold on the black market to wealthy collectors and medical schools. The funeral feasts were a way to get close to their victims, to study their ailments, to identify who would be the most valuable specimen. The feasts were a cover, a gruesome, celebratory ritual that distracted the town from the true horror taking place behind the scenes. The next target, Arthur revealed, was a sickly, wealthy gentleman named Mr. Harrington, a recluse with a rare bone disease. Elias and Martha had been making regular visits, bringing him tonics to ease his pain. The family was planning a grand feast, a celebration of their most valuable acquisition yet. Eleanor knew they had to act fast. Their plan was simple, yet fraught with risk. They needed proof, something tangible that would expose the Blackwood's crimes. Arthur suggested they search his father's study. It was a fortress of secrets, locked and guarded, but Arthur knew a way in. He revealed a hidden key he had made years ago, a crude replica his father had never noticed. Under the cover of a thick, impenetrable fog that rolled in from the sea, they crept to the study door. The air was heavy with the smell of salt and decay. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as Arthur carefully, slowly, turned the key. The lock clicked, a sound that seemed to echo through the silent house. They slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind them. The room was a monument to Elias's grim profession, lined with jars filled with grotesque specimens, anatomical drawings, and a shelf of leather-bound ledgers, each one a chilling account of a life taken. Eleanor's eyes fell upon a small wooden box on Elias's desk. It was intricately carved with macabre symbols and locked with a small brass clasp. Arthur, with surprising skill, picked the lock with a thin wire he had stolen from his father's tools. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a broken locket. It was a simple, tarnished silver locket, but what was inside made Eleanor's blood run cold. One side held a faded photograph of a smiling young woman. The other side held a single, neatly folded note. Eleanor carefully unfolded the brittle paper. The handwriting was her mother's. "Elias, you must forgive me. I know what you do. I cannot let you take her. I am leaving. Take care of my daughter, Eleanor." The note was not a farewell. It was a desperate plea, a confession of a horrifying truth. Her mother hadn't died at sea. She had run away, trying to escape the Blackwoods. But why? Arthur, his face a mask of grief, pointed to the photograph. "That's her, Eleanor. Your mother, my aunt. She and my father were in love before she met your father. She knew about the business. She helped them. She was one of them." Eleanor's world tilted on its axis. Her mother, the woman she had revered, the woman she thought had been taken by the sea, was a Blackwood, a part of this gruesome family business. It explained the distant relationship, the sudden adoption. It wasn't pity, it was a grim familial obligation. The truth was far more horrifying than she could have ever imagined, but the broken locket held another secret. A smaller, almost invisible slip of paper was tucked into the locket's clasp. It was a single sentence, scrawled in a shaky hand. "The cure is in the books." Eleanor looked at Arthur. "What does that mean?" Arthur, his eyes wide with dawning horror, pointed to the shelves of old medical books. "The tonics for their victims, they aren't tonics at all, they're poisons." But she wrote cure. My mother, my father's sister, she was a nurse. She was supposed to help them. He shook his head, his voice filled with a mixture of confusion and grief. She always said there was a way to make it stop. Before they could fully process the new information, the floorboards above them creaked. They froze. The door to the study creaked open. Elias stood in the doorway, a low, menacing smile on his face. "Looking for something, children?" he asked, his voice a chilling monotone. "I believe that belongs to me." He gestured to the locket in Eleanor's hand. "It was her final gift to me, a reminder of what I lost, a reminder of what I must do." His gaze was fixed on Eleanor, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying paternalistic pride. "You are just like her, Eleanor. You have her eyes, her curiosity, and her uncanny knack for meddling in what doesn't concern you." Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. He didn't just want to adopt her. He wanted to claim her, to mold her into the next generation of his monstrous legacy. The broken locket was no longer a memento, it was a key that unlocked a lineage of poisoners and undertakers, a legacy she now desperately needed to escape. Elias's confrontation was less a moment of anger and more a terrifying revelation. He wasn't furious. He was calmly, unnervingly pleased. He seemed to see Eleanor's discovery not as an act of rebellion, but as a rite of passage, a confirmation that she was truly his blood. He didn't confiscate the locket, merely smiled and said, "Keep it. A part of your legacy, Eleanor. Something to remind you of where you truly belong." The words were a poison in themselves, designed to infect her with the same rot that had consumed his family for generations. Arthur was paralyzed by fear. His father's calm was more chilling than any rage. Elias's words had stripped away the last vestiges of doubt, confirming that the horrors were a matter of pride, a twisted family tradition passed down through the generations. Eleanor, however, felt a cold clarity descend upon her. The time for whispering and notes was over. It was a fight for survival now. The note in the locket, "The cure is in the books," haunted her. It was a cryptic clue, a whisper from her mother's past, a final act of defiance. Eleanor knew she had to find out what it meant. She returned to the study after Elias had left, a sense of urgency propelling her forward. Arthur, however, refused to go back in. "It's a trap, Eleanor," he pleaded, his face pale. "He's waiting for us. He knows we'll go back." But Eleanor couldn't be deterred. She had to find a way to stop them, and the answer, she believed, was in that room. She slipped back into the study, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. She started systematically going through the books, her fingers tracing the titles. Old medical texts, books on botany, ledgers. She was looking for a specific clue, a keyword, something that would point her to the cure. She searched for hours, her hope dwindling with each passing minute. Finally, in a dusty corner of a shelf, she found a book that seemed out of place. It was a small, leather-bound volume with no title on the spine. It was a book on poisons, but its pages were filled with notes and corrections, in a hand she recognized as her mother's. It was a collection of recipes, not for food, but for concoctions meant to heal. Her mother had been an alchemist, a healer, using her knowledge of plants not to harm, but to help. The book contained detailed recipes for antidotes to the very poisons the Blackwoods were using. Eleanor's heart soared. This was it. The proof. The cure. Her mother, she realized, had not been a willing accomplice. She had been a spy, an unwilling participant in a dark family legacy who had been desperately trying to stop it from within. But why did she stay for so long? Why did she never leave? The answer, Eleanor found, was in a small folded letter tucked inside the back cover of the book. It was from Elias, written in a hand that was both chillingly formal and deeply possessive. "Dearest Amelia," it read, "I know you are trying to thwart my plans. Your little cures will not save them. They will, however, make their final moments more peaceful. Know this, your daughter's life is tied to your obedience. Any attempt to flee, and she will be the next guest of honor at my table." Eleanor's breath hitched. Elias had not just held her mother captive, he had threatened her. He had dangled Eleanor's life as a weapon, a cruel instrument of control. Her mother hadn't left because she couldn't. She had sacrificed her freedom, her happiness, for her daughter's safety. The realization was a devastating blow, but it also filled her with a newfound strength. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore, she was fighting to honor her mother's sacrifice. Eleanor carefully copied the names of the most potent antidotes from the book onto a small piece of paper. She knew she couldn't take the book itself. Elias would notice its absence immediately. She tucked the paper into her shoe, a secret key to her survival. She returned to her room, her mind racing. She had the proof, the names of the poisons, the recipes for the cures, but she had no one to share it with. The town was under the Blackwoods' spell, a captive audience to their gruesome spectacle. Who would believe her? An orphaned child, living under the roof of the very people she was accusing. As she looked out her window at the sea, a beacon of light in the distance caught her eye. It was the lighthouse. The keeper, an old, grizzled man named Silas, was a friend of her father's. He was a man who had seen the worst of the sea and the best of humanity. He was the only person in Havenwood she felt she could truly trust. Her plan was simple. She would wait for the next funeral feast, the time when Elias and Martha would be distracted by their performance. She would slip away, run to the lighthouse, and show Silas the evidence. He would believe her. He had to. He was her only hope. As she lay in bed, the locket clutched in her hand, she knew the risk was immense. If she failed, if Elias caught her, she wouldn't just be punished. She would become a cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered in the fog-shrouded streets of Havenwood, the macabre case of the girl medium, the one who tried to outwit the undertakers, and lost. The day of Mr. Harrington's funeral was shrouded in a fog so thick it felt like a living thing, a spectral presence that clung to the town's every crevice. Eleanor saw it as an ally, a veil that would hide her desperate escape. The house was a hive of activity. Martha was a whirlwind of motion in the kitchen, her face flushed with the heat of the stove. Elias, dressed in his finest suit, stood in the study, his face a mask of solemnity as he greeted mourners. Eleanor stayed close to Arthur, their silent communication a lifeline in the chaos. She had told him of her plan to go to Silas at the lighthouse. His face, though pale with fear, held a flicker of hope. He knew this was their only chance. "Be careful, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chatter of the guests. "My father. He has eyes everywhere." As the guests settled down for the feast, Eleanor made her move. She slipped away from the table, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She moved silently through the crowded hallway, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses a grotesque symphony behind her. She reached the front door, her hand trembling as she turned the knob. It was locked. Elias, with a terrifying premonition, had locked the door from the inside. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She was trapped. But then, Arthur appeared from the shadows. He didn't speak, just pointed to a small window in the scullery, a space she had never noticed before. It was a narrow opening, just wide enough for her to squeeze through. With a nod of understanding, she moved towards it, her movements fluid and silent. She pushed the window open, the cool, damp air a shock against her skin. She slipped through, the rough wood scraping against her dress. She was outside, the fog a dense, enveloping blanket. She ran, her bare feet pounding on the cold earth, her breath a ragged plume in the frigid air. The town was a labyrinth in the fog, every building a vague, ghostly silhouette. She kept her eyes fixed on the distant, pulsing light of the lighthouse, a solitary beacon in the darkness. She had to be careful. The roads were treacherous, filled with deep ruts and sharp stones. The fog made it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of her. She stumbled, fell, and picked herself up again, her focus a singular point, the lighthouse. As she ran, a voice, low and menacing, seemed to echo through the mist. "Eleanor, where are you, child?" It was Elias. He had discovered her escape. He was hunting her. She didn't dare answer, just ran faster, her lungs burning, the taste of salt and fear on her tongue. She heard footsteps behind her, a steady, measured pace that was too deliberate to be accidental. He was closer now. "Eleanor, don't be foolish. You belong with us. You're a Blackwood." The words were a vile comfort, a verbal leash. She broke through the last line of trees and saw it. The lighthouse, a towering, majestic pillar of hope against the turbulent sea. The keeper's cottage, a small, sturdy structure, stood at its base. She ran to the door, her fist pounding on the wood. "Silas, Silas, please!" she cried, her voice raw with desperation. The door opened and Silas, a man with a face weathered by a lifetime of sea winds, looked down at her, his eyes filled with concern. "Eleanor, what in God's name?" "Silas, you have to help me," she gasped, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. They're not who you think they are. They're poisoners, murderers. Silas's brow furrowed. Eleanor, child, what are you talking about? The Blackwoods? They're good people. No, she cried, her voice cracking. They're not. They've been killing people, Silas, with their funeral feasts. They're harvesting things. I have proof. She pulled the crumpled piece of paper from her shoe, her hands shaking as she held it out to him. It's a list of antidotes. My mother, Before she could finish, a shadow loomed out of the fog. Elias, his face usually so calm, was a mask of cold fury. Eleanor, he said, his voice a low hiss. Come home. Now. Silas, seeing the venom in the man's eyes, stepped in front of Eleanor, shielding her. Elias, what is the meaning of this? The child is terrified. This is a family matter, Silas, Elias said, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's. She's unwell, confused. Her imagination gets the better of her. I'll take her home now. Eleanor, her mind working furiously, knew she had to convince Silas, right now. He's lying, Silas. He killed Mr. Harrington. He's going to kill more people. Elias let out a low, humorless laugh. A child's tale, Silas, a morbid fascination with death. It's a Blackwood trait. He moved forward, his hand reaching for Eleanor. Silas, however, stood his ground. He didn't believe Eleanor's wild tale, not yet, but he saw the fear in her eyes, and he saw the chilling resolve in Elias's. He had known Eleanor's father for years. He knew the girl was not prone to fits of fancy. Eleanor, go inside. I'll deal with this. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She slipped past Silas and into the cottage, the door slamming shut behind her. She heard their voices, low and strained, through the thick wooden door. Then a sudden horrifying sound. A thud, followed by a choked gasp. Eleanor's heart plummeted. She ran to the window and peered out. Elias stood over Silas, who lay on the ground, a single deep gash on his forehead, his face pale and unmoving. Elias looked up at the window, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He held a small, sharp knife in his hand, its blade glinting in the faint light of the lighthouse. He hadn't just come to take her back. He had come to silence her. And now he had taken down the only person who could have helped her. She was truly alone, and the hunter was at the door. Eleanor backed away from the window, her body trembling with a mixture of terror and revulsion. Elias, a man she had once seen as a strange but ultimately harmless figure, had just revealed himself to be a cold-blooded killer. He was no longer a shadow. He was a monster in the flesh. She was trapped in the lighthouse, a beacon of hope that had now become a prison, her sanctuary a cage. She heard the sound of the front door being forced open. Elias was coming in. Eleanor's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic storm of panic. She was on the ground floor. There was only one way to go. Up. She scrambled for the narrow, winding staircase that led to the top of the lighthouse. She had to get to the top, to the light, to the only place where she could hope to get a signal, to see a passing ship, anything. She ran, her bare feet slapping against the cold metal stairs, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. The stairs seemed to go on forever, a spiraling vortex of iron and fear. She heard Elias's footsteps below, the rhythmic, heavy thud of his boots on the metal. He wasn't running. He was walking. He was enjoying the hunt. He knew she had nowhere to go. She finally reached the top, the small, cramped room that housed the massive lamp. The air was thick with the smell of kerosene and salt. She looked out the window, a panorama of the unforgiving sea and the fog-shrouded town below. The town was a silent, sleeping beast. No one could help her. No one would even know she was in danger until it was too late. She heard the last footsteps on the stairs. He was here. Eleanor, her mind working with a desperate clarity, looked around the room. There was nothing to defend herself with, no weapons, no escape. The only thing in the room besides the lamp was a small rope and a collection of tools for maintaining the light. The door to the room creaked open. Elias stood in the doorway, his face a grim, triumphant mask. "Nowhere to run, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and calm. "It's time to come home." He took a step forward, his hand outstretched. Eleanor, her back pressed against the cold glass of the lamp, held out her hand, the piece of paper with the antidote still clutched in her fist. "You'll never get away with this, Elias," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I have proof. My mother's recipes, the antidotes." A flash of something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, but something closer to pity. "The antidotes? You really think she was trying to save them? You're so naive, Eleanor. Your mother was not a healer. She was an artist. She perfected my work. She made the poisons not just deadly, but untraceable. The antidotes you have there are nothing but a list of ingredients for the next feast. She was making notes, not a cure." He let out a low chuckle, a sound filled with a horrifying mix of derision and pride. "She was proud of our legacy. She wanted you to be proud too." Eleanor's world shattered. Her mother, the woman she had revered as a hero, a victim, was a willing accomplice. She had not been a prisoner. She had been a partner. The locket, the note, the desperate farewell. It was all a lie. A carefully constructed deception to make Eleanor believe she was a hero in a dark tale, when in reality she was a pawn in a grim generational game. Elias took another step forward, his smile widening. "You have her mind, Eleanor. Her creativity. You would be a perfect addition to our family business. You could take it to new heights." Eleanor, her mind numb with the horrifying truth, looked from Elias to the lamp. The light, the very thing she had been running towards, was a symbol of her despair. It was a beacon that had led her into a trap, but it also gave her an idea, a desperate, final gamble. "I won't join you, Elias," she said, her voice filled with a newfound resolve. "I'll die first." She lunged, not at him, but at the lamp's lever. She pulled it with all her might. The lamp, a massive, heavy machine, was set to rotate. The gears, rusty and old, groaned with the sudden movement. Elias, surprised, stumbled back. The massive gears of the lamp, a blur of turning metal, were coming towards him. He tried to move out of the way, but it was too late. The light's massive arm, a heavy iron bar designed to sweep the sea, caught him. The impact was a sickening, bone-crushing thud. Elias was thrown back, his body a broken heap against the wall. Eleanor watched, a grim spectator to her own desperate act. He was not moving. He was dead. The man who had taken her in, who had killed her mother and countless others, was a broken man on the floor. She had won, but at what cost? She looked down at the paper in her hand, the list of antidotes her mother had meticulously crafted. They were not cures. They were recipes for death. The realization was a soul-crushing weight. She stumbled down the stairs, her mind a blank slate. She found Silas on the ground, a deep gash on his head, but his eyes were fluttering. He was alive. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed a piece of her dress to his wound. "Silas, Silas, you have to wake up." As she sat there, the silence of the night broken only by the sound of the waves and her own ragged breathing, she realized something. The locket, the note, the lies. They weren't just a deception. They were a test. A twisted, morbid test to see if she had the heart for the family business. She had failed. And in doing so, she had won her freedom. But the victory felt hollow. She had killed a man, and she was now a part of the Blackwood legacy in a way she could never have imagined. She was a survivor, but she was also a killer. A part of her had died on that cold metal floor. The sound of sirens, a modern intrusion in a world that felt trapped in the past, broke the silence of the night. Eleanor, her hands still stained with blood and dirt, sat by Silas's side as the town's small police force arrived. Silas, though in and out of consciousness, was able to confirm her story. He had seen Elias attack him. He had seen Eleanor flee up the lighthouse stairs. And the body of Elias Blackwood, a broken mess at the top of the lighthouse, was undeniable proof of her desperate tale. The police, led by a young, pragmatic officer named Thomas, were skeptical at first. But Eleanor, Her voice, a fragile whisper, began to reveal the truth. She spoke of the funeral feasts, of the ledgers, of the quiet deaths in the town. She spoke of the hidden garden of poisons and the tonics Elias and Martha had given their victims. The story, as outlandish as it sounded, was corroborated by the grim evidence. The body of Mr. Harrington was exhumed, and a team of doctors, after a careful examination, found traces of a lethal concoction of herbs that Eleanor had copied from her mother's book. The Blackwoods house was a treasure trove of horrifying secrets, jars of preserved organs, meticulous ledgers detailing their crimes, and a hidden laboratory in the basement. Martha Blackwood, when confronted with the evidence, crumbled. Her cheerful facade shattered, revealing a terrified, broken woman who had been a pawn in her husband's twisted game. She confessed, her voice a hollow shell of its former self, that Elias had threatened to kill her and Arthur if they ever disobeyed him. He was a man of immense control, a patriarch who had bent his family to his will through fear and intimidation. The funeral feasts, she revealed, were not just a celebration of death. They were a display of his power, a morbid theater in which he was the star. Arthur, now free from his father's shadow, was a shell of a boy. He gave his testimony, his voice flat and emotionless, detailing the horrifying things his father had made him do. He confessed to helping his father prepare the poisons, to his constant fear and guilt. He, like Eleanor, was a survivor of a psychological prison, but the scars would never truly heal. The town of Havenwood was in an uproar. The news spread like wildfire, a tale of a monstrous family living in their midst, poisoning their loved ones, then feasting on their corpses. The fear turned to a grim resolve. They had been lied to. They had been victims. They had been guests at a banquet of death. The Blackwood name, once whispered in fear and fascination, was now spat with revulsion. The grand Gothic house was burned to the ground by an angry mob, a pyre to the family's dark legacy. Eleanor was taken in by Silas and his wife, a kind, gentle woman who cared for her as if she were her own. Eleanor was a hero, a small girl who had saved a town from a monster. But the victory felt hollow. The public lauded her for her bravery, but her mind was a constant loop of the past. The lies her mother had told, the look in Elias's eyes as he fell, the sight of Arthur's broken spirit. The ghosts of the Blackwood family she knew would haunt her forever. She found peace in the quiet moments, in the constant rhythmic sound of the waves, in the kind, steady presence of Silas and his wife. She started school again, her mind finally free from the constant dread of the Blackwoods. She was a child again, but a child who had seen too much. The vivid imagination that had once been her solace was now a source of torment, replaying the grim scenes from her past. One day Arthur came to see her at the lighthouse. He was no longer the quiet, sorrowful boy she had known. He was a survivor, but a broken one. "I'm leaving, Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet. "I can't stay here. Too many ghosts." He told her he was going to a city far away, to use his knowledge of medicine to help people, to atone for the sins of his past. "Will you be okay?" she asked him, her voice filled with a genuine concern. He nodded, a faint, sad smile on his face. "I'll try. I have to, for all of them." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a shared understanding. They were the last two survivors of the Blackwood legacy. They had fought their way out of a psychological prison, but they were still bound by the same terrible secret. As he turned to leave, he handed her a small, beautifully carved wooden box. Inside, on a bed of velvet, lay a single, pristine white feather. "This was from my mother," he said. "She told me it was a symbol of hope, that no matter how dark things get, there's always a way to rise above it." Eleanor looked at the feather, a small, fragile thing, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The Blackwoods may have poisoned a town, but they had also, in their own twisted way, brought two people together, two survivors who had found their way out of the darkness and into the light. The journey was not over, but for the first time in a long time, She felt like she could face the future. The story of Eleanor Vance and the Blackwood family is a testament to the fact that the greatest monsters are often the ones who hide in plain sight. If you've been on the edge of your seat, following Eleanor's journey through Havenwood's chilling secrets, be sure to hit that subscribe button. More dark and twisted tales await you. Life in the lighthouse cottage settled into a rhythm of quiet healing. Eleanor found comfort in the simple routines, waking to the mournful cry of the gulls, helping Silas polish the massive lens of the lamp, and listening to the stories of his life at sea. But the past, like the relentless tide, always found a way to creep back in. The feather Arthur had given her sat on her bedside table, a constant reminder of the darkness she had escaped and the family she had left behind. The local newspaper, a small weekly publication, ran a series of sensational articles about the Havenwood poisoners. Eleanor, hailed as a hero, was the central figure in every story. But the praise felt like a heavy coat, a garment that didn't fit. She wasn't a hero. She was a girl who had stumbled upon a horrifying secret and had fought for her life. The true heroes, she believed, were the victims, the ones who had died in their sleep, oblivious to the monstrous banquet that followed. The town, though grateful, treated her with a strange mixture of reverence and fear. The children, once her playmates, now whispered about the girl who killed the undertaker's ghost. The adults, though kind, kept a respectful distance, as if her proximity might bring them bad luck. Eleanor, for the first time in her life, felt truly alone. The Blackwoods, in death, had created a different kind of prison for her, a cage of public perception. Silas, with his innate wisdom, noticed her growing isolation. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he spoke. "You can't let their ghost stories define you, Eleanor. They'll pass. People have short memories. What happened, it was a terrible thing, but it doesn't have to be your whole story." Eleanor, her gaze fixed on the churning sea, shook her head. "But it is, Silas. I killed a man. And my mother. She was a part of it all. How do I live with that?" Silas sighed, a sound filled with a lifetime of experience. "You live with it by not letting it consume you. Your mother, for all her faults, tried to save you. She gave you the key to your freedom. And Elias, he was a man who had to be stopped. What you did was an act of self-preservation, Eleanor. Don't let their darkness tarnish your light." His words, though a comfort, didn't fully quell the storm inside her. The note in the locket, the one that had said, "The cure is in the books," still haunted her. Was her mother truly an accomplice, as Elias had claimed, or was she, as Eleanor had first believed, a victim who had been forced to act? The ambiguity was a form of torture, a constant gnawing at her soul. One afternoon, a letter arrived for her. It was from Arthur. His handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. He was in a large city, working in a hospital as a janitor, studying medicine in his spare time. He told her he was finally free, but the memories of his past were a constant burden. He spoke of the guilt he carried, the faces of the victims haunting his dreams. But then he mentioned something that made Eleanor's heart pound. "I found something, Eleanor," he wrote. "A small journal my mother kept, hidden in a loose floorboard. She never trusted Father. She was always planning her escape. I've been reading it, and she talks about your mother. She says Elias forced her to stay, that he was a cruel, possessive man. He lied to you, Eleanor. He lied about everything. Your mother was a victim just like me. She was a good person, Eleanor. She never stopped loving you." A wave of emotion, so potent it made her knees weak, washed over Eleanor. Relief, grief, and a profound sense of vindication. Her first instinct had been right. Her mother was a hero, a victim. She had sacrificed her life to protect her. The locket, the note, it was all a desperate plea for help. A final act of defiance against a monster. Elias hadn't lied to get her to join him. He had lied to break her spirit, to make her believe she had a monster's blood in her veins. The letter was a turning point. The weight of the feather no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a promise. a promise that no matter how dark the legacy, a person's heart could still be pure. Her mother was a testament to that, and so was Arthur. And so, she realized, was she. She had a choice. She could let the past define her, or she could use it as a catalyst for a new beginning. She wrote back to Arthur, a long, heartfelt letter filled with her own stories of healing and hope. She told him that their shared past didn't have to be a curse. It could be a source of strength, a bond that connected them in a world where no one else could truly understand. She sent her letter, and, as she watched the postman carry it away, she felt a sense of purpose. She had been a victim of the Blackwood legacy, but she was now a survivor, a testament to the power of human spirit. She had faced a monster in the dark, and she had won. Her story was not one of horror and despair, but of resilience and hope. The case of the girl medium was closed, but the story of Eleanor Vance was just beginning. Years passed, and the ghost of the Blackwood family slowly receded into the realm of local folklore. The grand Gothic house was a vacant lot, the land around it a desolate reminder of a grim past. Eleanor, no longer a child, had blossomed into a young woman of quiet strength and profound empathy. She still lived with Silas and his wife, a family she had chosen and who had, in turn, chosen her. She had a job now, working at the town's small library, a place she had once seen as a refuge from the outside world. She often received letters from Arthur, each one a testament to his slow and steady healing. He had become a physician, a quiet, dedicated doctor who specialized in treating those with chronic illnesses. He was, in his own way, fighting the ghosts of his past, using his knowledge to heal instead of harm. His letters were filled with a quiet sense of purpose, a redemption he was working hard to earn. The town of Havenwood, too, had changed. The people, after the initial shock and revulsion, had begun to heal. The funeral feasts were a distant, horrifying memory. A new undertaker had opened a business in town, a kind, gentle man who performed his duties with a respectful solemnity that was a stark contrast to the Blackwood's macabre theatrics. But the past had a way of reappearing in unexpected ways. One blustery autumn afternoon, a man walked into the library. He was a tall, stooped man with a face as weathered as the old fishing boats on the harbor. He introduced himself as Mr. Cole and said he was a historian, researching the local lore and legends of the region. He was particularly interested in the Blackwood family. Eleanor, her heart a cold knot in her chest, tried to feign ignorance. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice strained. "I don't know much about them." But Mr. Cole smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Oh, but you do, Miss Vance. The entire town knows. You were the girl who exposed them." Eleanor, seeing no way out, began to speak, her voice a low murmur, telling him the sanitized version of the story. The girl who uncovered the dark secrets, the brave escape, the eventual justice. She left out the parts about her mother, about the killing of Elias, about the psychological torment she had endured. It was a story she had rehearsed for years, a shield she used to protect herself from the questions and the morbid curiosity of strangers. But Mr. Cole was not a simple historian. He listened, his head cocked to the side, a thoughtful expression on his face. When she finished, he leaned forward, his voice a quiet whisper. "That's a very good story, Miss Vance. A compelling narrative. But it leaves out the best parts, doesn't it?" Eleanor's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir," she said, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. "The real story," he said, his eyes gleaming with a strange, unnerving light. "The story of the girl with the gift, the medium, the one who could feel the whispers of the dead." He paused, a cruel smile on his face. "Did you feel the whispers, Eleanor? Did you feel the life draining from their bodies? Did you feel the thrill of the hunt?" Eleanor, paralyzed by a familiar fear, could only stare at him. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Just a man," he said, "who knows a good story when he hears one, and I know a good successor when I see one." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was a replica of Elias's ledger, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting. But the names were different. They were recent names, names of people who had died in a nearby town. "I've been a great admirer of your work, Miss Vance, your family's work. Elias was a master, but he was careless. He let his emotions get the better of him. He let himself get caught. I, however, am much more discreet." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. This was not a ghost from the past. This was a living, breathing monster, another undertaker, another poisoner. He had found her, he had been watching her, and he saw her not as a hero, but as a protégé. "I have a business proposition for you, Eleanor," he said, his voice a silken whisper. "A partnership. We can continue the family legacy. We can make a fortune. We can be a new kind of family." Eleanor, her mind a frantic, chaotic storm, looked at the ledger in his hand. She saw the names of innocent people. She saw the ghost of Elias in his chilling smile. She saw the horrifying reflection of her past in this man's present. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she couldn't run. She had to fight. She had to end this dark legacy once and for all. The case of the girl medium was not closed. It had just entered its final, most terrifying chapter. Eleanor, her fear giving way to a cold, hard resolve, looked at Mr. Cole, the man who had come to her with a proposition from hell. He was not just a historian. He was a predator, an heir to the Blackwood legacy. He had been watching her, studying her, waiting for the right moment to strike. He saw her not as a hero, but as a recruit, a new partner in his grim business. "I won't join you," she said, her voice steady and firm. "I won't let you continue what they started." Mr. Cole let out a low, humorless laugh. "You're just like your mother, Eleanor. You have her fire, her idealism. It's a shame. It was her one weakness." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small glass vial filled with a dark liquid. "This, Eleanor, is a testament to my work. A single drop and a man's heart will simply stop. No trace, no questions. The perfect crime." He smiled, a chillingly confident expression. "I've come to invite you to a funeral feast, Eleanor. The final one." Eleanor, her mind racing, knew she had to act fast. She couldn't let him leave. He was a monster, and he had to be stopped. She had no weapons, no help. She was alone in the library, a quiet, peaceful place that had now become a battlefield. "I've been expecting you," she said, a lie she hoped would disarm him. "I've been in touch with Arthur. He told me he was worried about a man who was asking questions about my mother, a man who was carrying on the family business." Mr. Cole's smile faltered. "Arthur? That broken boy? He wouldn't dare." "He did," Eleanor said, her voice filled with a confident bluff. "He's been working with the authorities. They know about you. They're coming. They're tracking your every move." She gestured to the vial in his hand. "They know about the poison, too." The lie, a desperate gamble, hit its mark. Mr. Cole's face, which had been so confident just moments ago, was now a mask of fear and fury. He had been so sure of himself, so sure he had the upper hand. He lunged at her, the vial clutched in his hand. Eleanor, her movements a flash of instinct, dodged him. She grabbed a heavy old book from the desk, a massive leather-bound volume on ancient history, and swung it with all her might. The book hit him in the chest, a solid, satisfying thud. He stumbled back, a gasp of air escaping his lungs. The vial of poison flew from his hand, a fragile glass sphere arcing through the air. It hit the floor and shattered, the dark liquid spilling across the wooden planks, seeping into the grain. Mr. Cole, his face contorted in a rage, lunged again. But Eleanor was ready for him. She picked up a chair and shoved it into his legs. He fell, a heavy, ungraceful mess. She scrambled over him, her mind a singular focus on survival. She ran to the door and screamed, "Help! Help! Call the police!" The sound of her screams brought the townspeople running. The librarian from the next room, a young man named James, came in first. He saw Mr. Cole, his body a twisted heap on the floor, and Eleanor, her face a mask of terror and defiance. He didn't hesitate. He held Mr. Cole down until the authorities arrived. Mr. Cole, defeated and humiliated, was taken into custody. The police, after a thorough search of his belongings, found more ledgers, more vials of poison, more evidence of a terrifying and macabre business. He was, as Eleanor had suspected, the new Undertaker, a ghost from the Blackwoods past, a new monster born from the ashes of the old. In the aftermath, as the town once again reeled from the horrifying truth, Eleanor was hailed as a hero. But this time, the praise felt different. This time, she knew it was deserved. She had faced a monster, not with a lie, but with a truth, and she had won. A few days later, a letter arrived for her from Arthur. He had heard the news. He wrote that he was proud of her, that she had done what he couldn't. She had faced the ghost of their past and put it to rest. He said that he was finally at peace, knowing that the Blackwood legacy of poison and murder was finally, truly, over. Eleanor, reading his words, felt a sense of closure she had never thought possible. The case of the girl medium was not about a child with a gift. It was about a girl who had a profound sense of right and wrong, a girl who had faced the deepest of human darkness and emerged not unscathed, but whole. She had been a victim of a psychological terror, but she had become a survivor. She was not a medium, she was not a ghost. She was Eleanor Vance, and her story was finally her own.